Mothers of children with special needs experience a wide range of emotions: fear, disappointment, guilt, grief, despair. They have a yearning for relief, but often feel isolated and inadequate as they look at the parenting experience of others. As you pour your energy and resources into raising a special needs child, it's easy to struggle with feelings of isolation, maybe even competition, and definitely overwhelm. For the special need mom who yearns for community and support on what can be a really lonely road, today's guest wants to remind you that you're not alone. Your best is good enough. And even on the hard days, there are blessings to be had. So today we're going to be talking about flourishing when the unexpected happens and hope for the special needs parent. Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in your God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm always honored when you choose to spend a few minutes of your week with us. Today, we're going to be talking about flourishing when the unexpected happens and offering hope for the special needs parent. But I want to start off this episode reminding us of what Psalm says. In Psalm 40, verses 1 through 3, it says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry fog, and he set my feet on a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Today, I've asked my friend Carrie Holt to join us. She's got experience and wisdom to share from her own journey. She was the host for 4 years, co-host of the podcast Take Heart Special Moms podcast. And she's an author and a speaker whose passion is to encourage women to flourish in the unexpected. Through her testimony of raising and homeschooling 4 children, including her son who has medical, mental, and physical disabilities, Carrie's desires for women and mothers to experience hope that we have in the trials through the steadfast love of Jesus. She's co-authored the book, The Other Side of Special, Navigating the Messy, Emotional, Joy-Filled Life of Special Needs Moms. Welcome to the program, Carrie.
Thank you for having me.
You are one of the perfect guests to talk about this because you walked the road. And what I've found through years of interviewing people in my career, diagnosing children with special needs, walking alongside parents who are caregivers for the kids with special needs, is that frequently our ministry comes out of our own experience, hurts, needs, and desires. And I'm wondering how that's true for you as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that I just have learned is we can spend all of our time fighting
Mhm.
this diagnosis, is spending a lot of energy just railing against what feels like really an unfairness to us because our kids, the lifelong diagnosis, I mean, it's lifelong. So the diagnosis is lifelong. And I hate to say that our kids are a trial because they're not, but it is a trial that you're living with that doesn't end until either you pass away or your child passes away. And so I think one of the things that I've learned is that this hope-filled perspective comes from accepting what's happening and that it is sifted through the hands of our loving Savior.
That must have been a hard fought lesson because in walking with hundreds, thousands of families in a similar situation to you, it does feel unfair. And it is so hard when all you have to do is open up your social media and you see all the highlight reels of everybody else and their life looks so perfect. But we want to talk about what life is like for the special needs parents. So help us to understand how this experience changes life on a day-to-day basis.
So every parent, it's a little bit different. For us, I was prenatally diagnosed with our son having a lifelong condition that causes paralysis. And then he became medically fragile when he was 2.5 weeks old. So he ended up with a trach, a ventilator, and a feeding tube. And probably one of the things that you have to really fight this tension between expecting bad things to happen every day because you're trying to protect your heart and mind from you get used to maybe just some sense of normalcy and a new normal, so to speak. And then, as you know, just a few weeks ago, my son ended up in the hospital for 4 days with two surgeries 40 hours apart. And we hadn't had that in about 4 years where it was unplanned that way. And so I feel like on a daily basis, sometimes you're just fighting this cynicism of just waiting for the shoe to drop and that tension of like hoping that things are going to be calm and your holidays aren't going to get ruined or just the upheaval that happens in a family when your child is medically fragile and they get sick or whatever it might be. And then also just, okay, this is the reality of our lives. And the other part is just the grief.
Mhm.
I didn't realize, I knew, this was 18 years ago that grief happened with the diagnosis, definitely, especially for us. It was sudden. It came out of left field. I had no feelings of something's wrong with my pregnancy or anything like that. But then it wasn't until my son was 5 that I just felt like the Holy Spirit said, you're going to be living in the grieving cycle for the rest of your child's life. And that was devastating, but also I felt like it was the kindness of our Father to reveal that to me because it gave me language and a description of the upheaval of the up and down of the everyday journey.
So, what did this process teach you about trying to maintain some semblance of control in life?
You don't have any?
Mm.
You know, honestly, personally, it's been really easy for me to give up the control over just the unexpected of just like I said a few weeks ago when he ended up in the hospital because I have no control over those medical things. I don't have any audience or any input into that. It's the everyday pieces of his care that is where I really struggle because sometimes I feel like I make mistakes or I miss things, or I might look back over the last 6 months and go, oh, he's been really grumpy. He's been a little off. Or, and so along the way, sometimes you blame yourself because you might go in and have a test and see, oh, he's got damage to his optic nerves. Well, he probably had swelling in his brain for months and I missed it. So that's where it's the struggle of, I was just writing an email to my email list. There are times that I have thought it's my job to keep my child alive.
Mm.
And
That's a heavy burden.
it's heavy. And the Holy Spirit says, no, it's not. You feel like it is, but it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. What advice would you give to other special needs parents in terms of how to cope with caregiver fatigue? I did a recent episode in honor of National Caregivers Month, and that's a real thing. I mean, and you've got a family, not just one child. So you are trying to take care of a whole family while caregiving 24/7. So how do you manage that caregiver fatigue?
So, two things come to mind. One is you need a community around you, and it can be really difficult. We've had nursing care in our home, and that thankfully that's had it's a double-edged sword because you have people in your home. I've had nurses watching me parent for the last 21 years, or about 18 years. So my oldest son is 21, so they came into our home when he was about 3.5. You have to be willing to open up and be vulnerable and have a community around you. And secondly, I think you have to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and have the long-term goals in mind because, it can be easy to live from adrenaline rush to adrenaline rush, which we have. My son's had 65 surgeries. But if I am not taking time daily to just plug myself into the Word of God, or taking a walk or choosing to eat right or choosing even to plan a meal or a couple healthy meals for the week long term if you're just living consistently in unhealthy habits, it's not going to serve you in the long run. Certainly there are days where it's okay, right? I'm eating in the hospital cafeteria and I'm doing the best I can. But when things are a little bit calmer, I think you have to find what fuels you spiritually, emotionally, physically, and remember that long-term goal is to be there for your child and your family.
So you have to take time to take care of yourself.
Yes.
You won't be available to be fully present for the rest of your family and to caregive effectively for your child.
Yeah.
Friends, we're going to take a real quick commercial break, but I want you to stick with us and join us as Carrie talks more about flourishing when the unexpected happens, but offering hope for the special needs parent. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope Filled Perspective, where today's focus is giving hope to the special needs parent. Carrie, I can only imagine. We talked before the break about you had to come to terms with the fact that you will continually grieve over things the rest of your child's life. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk for a minute about the tension of lament.
Yeah, so I've learned a lot about lament just in the last probably 10 years. And, I grew up in a Christian home and a little bit under the impression that I had to have all the right words to pray. I had to put on a good girl facade in order to come into the presence of the Lord. And I think just just a few years ago was when the reality of the permanency of our situation came in, settled on me. There were several things that I had prayed for while I was still pregnant with my son that I didn't want to happen. I had read a book and they had talked about all these worst case scenarios, and I had prayed fervently that all those things wouldn't happen. And then every single thing on that list did happen. And in the moment, it was just keep moving forward, keep taking one day at a time. And then several years later, it was just this realization that, Lord, you said no. And what kind of God does that? What kind of God allows your child to suffer and have a trach and have breathing problems and be in pain? And lament is the language of just pouring out your heart to the Lord of this doesn't feel fair. I'm upset. I'm even angry about what this feels like. And you read through the Psalms and you see the raw language of David and pouring out our heart to God and calling out to him just in those scriptures you read at the beginning. And also knowing that God's presence is near and he can take all of our grief and our pain. My husband said to me once, what kind of relationship would you have on a human level if you only always told your friends the good things that are happening in your life and you never were opened up and were real about your pain? And it's same with our relationship with the Lord. And so once I began to just process and have the language to talk to him, the Lord has actually even just recently been showing me some things about this, just in his gracious kindness. Just a couple months ago, he said to me, Carrie, I answer prayers in yes, no, and wait. And on the surface, it might feel like I said no, but really, I just asked you to wait until heaven because he's going to make Toby's body whole someday. And I think, certainly God says no about a lot of things because he knows what's best and he knows how to create this hope-filled perspective and this purpose from my pain. And I've certainly seen that. But actually, it's just not right now. And it's beautiful to know that now.
I know that that does give you hope in the long term, but I also know that, like a lot of our listeners who they may not be a parent to a special needs child, but they've been praying for healing for themselves. And I just wonder, how do you wrestle with that knowledge of knowing God can heal, but hasn't yet? You alluded or you indicated that, he showed you that it wasn't really a no, it's a not yet. But in our humanness, you're looking at the rest of your life or the rest of Toby's life, knowing that God could heal. So help our listeners, give us some way to look at that because that's a really real tension.
I think for me personally, it is learning to take this one day at a time,
Yeah.
crying out in the pain when it's there, and then also remembering that God is in control. And I know that it sounds cliche, but I think it's also just looking for the little gifts of hope and joy that he gives us on a daily basis. And probably the biggest thing has just been his presence and knowing him in a way that had not known him if I wasn't in this. You think about a little child and, uh, like for instance, maybe you take your kids to Disney and they have everything in the world they could ever want. And then they're just acting like spoiled children, and they're selfish and angry. And I think about that as our human nature is if I had everything the way I wanted, I wouldn't be a pleasant person to be around. And I think God knows that. And as hard as that is, right? As
Yeah.
difficult as pain and suffering is, God has showed me his character and his presence. And sometimes it's just that perspective shift of, Lord, show me you. Instead of my eyes being on my pain and my suffering, show me how you've prepared me for this. Show me your character. Show me your glory. Show me your comfort. God is the God of all comfort. And yeah, it's just such this hard tension because personally, we each have to wrestle through this with the Lord. But I know for me, reading the Psalms, praying the Psalms, and then also remembering God's presence in each situation, how he's provided in the past has helped me live in that tension.
Ray, what do you wish that other people knew about special needs parenting?
Just that it's an ongoing thing, and no matter how strong a family looks, they are dealing with ongoing grief. And then even sometimes they're dealing with their child's grief. My son is verbal and can process a lot. And there are times that he asks me really hard questions. Why did God, you know, God
Mhm.
says this is for his glory, but why was it me? And isn't God selfish to want glory? My son's very black and white in his thinking. And how do I wrestle with those questions with him? And I think also just that we have a lot of fears that our community will get tired and what the future looks like sometimes when we're aging and we can't take care of our kids.
And how do you cope with the comments from others who really can't relate? And yet, I would imagine you've heard the gamut. And I really want to believe that people mean well, but they don't understand if they haven't walked in your shoes. How do you cope with that?
Probably not always well, if I want to be honest. In my flesh, I want to respond angrily or uh, just not be kind in my response. I think sometimes I'm getting a little better, maybe at just like you said, just trying to put myself in their shoes in that they don't understand. They're not going um to get it and maybe saying a prayer for them, understanding that I think one of the things I've realized is that a lot of times people are just really fearful because they don't want the suffering of others to happen to them because they really question, is God going to be there? Or if they don't know the Lord, I don't know how I will handle this in my strength. So really it's coming from a place of fear. And sometimes I think it's triggering something from their own story of origin. Maybe someone in their family had a disability and they weren't treated well, or they just they have to come face to face with those tough questions of suffering. Why does God allow suffering? Why did he allow that to happen? So I'm trying to assume the best and answer in kindness, uh, and understanding that they're probably coming really from a place of pain and fear.
So, for those listening who are not parents of special needs children, how can we provide support to parents who are walking through this? I know that's a broad question and everybody's situation is different, but we'd appreciate guidance on what we can do so that we're not doing or saying the wrong thing.
I think one thing that's really important is to when you bring up a story that you feel like is similar. For instance, one time I had someone say to me, "Oh, I understand that. My child went through this." It dismisses my pain
Yes,
and it's not helpful. I think the best things that you can do are be present. Job's friends were the best when they were silent.
exactly.
Share or share that you're praying for them. And I think, there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. And I think coming from a place of empathy, of imagining yourself in their shoes, is helpful. And then I also think that being very specific in the ways that you offer to help. Just I have a few examples from just a few weeks ago. It was, what meal do you want me to bring? I'm going to Meijer. I'm going to the grocery store. Sorry, that's a Midwestern grocery store.
I'm
I'm going
familiar.
to yeah, I'm going to the grocery store. What can I pick up for you? I had a friend just send us a DoorDash gift card without even asking. Just and and also be okay if we say we really are okay. Or, there were a couple times I had a friend ask, and honestly, I just didn't even have the mental capacity to figure out where they could get me coffee or where they could, just in that moment, the hospital was so chaotic. So I think it is trusting them. But and I think it kind of depends on the person. Like earlier on in the journey, we're not as willing to tell what we need for help. So, I encourage special needs moms, parents, have that list of things that you need for those crisis situations so you can share that with people. Meals are the biggest thing. We had meals from our group at church, and just not having to think through that, how I was going to feed my family or myself, was a huge load off. When we've been further down in the journey, we've learned, I think, to ask for help a little better. And so when we say, yes, we need this, or no, we don't, just to trust that.
Good practical advice because I think people really do want to help, but we don't always know what is helpful. So I'm grateful that you've offered specific suggestions. Friends, we're going to take a real quick break, but we're going to come back and talk to Carrie about her hope-filled perspective in such a difficult, trying situation as being a special needs parent. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective, where today we're talking about hope for the special needs parent. Carrie, what suggestion do you have that someone could begin to implement today to either continue in this journey or to support those who are in this journey? What have you learned from your years with Toby that you wish that maybe you had known years ago?
I know probably one of the biggest things is just that piece about grief and that grieving cycle, and having the language to describe where I am when I'm angry about a situation. A lot of times it's not really about that specific situation. It's the underlying grief of the rejection of my child, or the comparison in the moment of, my kid's not walking, or how, whatever that situation might be in the middle of that. It was so eye-opening and freeing to know that, today I'm experiencing denial and anger. Today I'm experiencing fear, and to have that language to describe that, it gives hope, because I know that God is present in that, and that he's present in our grief. I think the other piece of that is understanding that Jesus knows how we feel.
Mhm.
He put on human flesh, and he knows what it's like to be misunderstood, to wrestle with God in prayer over going to the cross and saying, Lord, let this cup pass from me, but your will be done. And us being able to pray that same hope-filled perspective that we're going to have to continue to go through this hard thing, but God is present with us. Just his wounding, his betrayal, his denial, his hunger, his fatigue. I mean, Jesus experienced just absolute exhaustion as a human being. And, Hebrews tells us that we don't have a high priest that cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. I'm so, so grateful for that hope. And then I think also it's just taking things one day at a time. I am a type A long-term planner, and so I will reason out every worst case scenario you can possibly imagine. And this journey has taught me I just have to focus on today. God is present in today. Where is he? Where can I see him in this moment? And not considering tomorrow, because God's holding that also.
Just how God wants us all to respond in our day to day, but it's really hard when we forecast today's worries on tomorrow.
Yes, it's
I
true.
know that caregiving doesn't happen in isolation. You have other children, you have a spouse. So, talk for just a moment about what we need to know in terms of walking this journey with our other family members. How has it affected your marriage and your parenting with your other children?
So, as far as our marriage, we just have learned to be a team together. But it's interesting. About 9 months ago, we've been married almost 25 years, and we looked at each other and said, if we're going to make it another 25, we need a counselor. We talk about being bison, heading into the storm. We were in a storm for 15 years. My son had 60 surgeries in the first 15 years of his life. And and we did well, but we had lost sight of one another, and that can be really, really hard. So I think it's important to make, like, kind of just talking back about those long-term goals and taking care of ourselves and our marriage. For the siblings, I think it's really important, when you asked earlier about how other people can help, it's recognizing that the siblings are going through a lot of difficult things also. There's a little bit of hubbub on social media about them living in glass houses because everyone is looking at them, watching them, seeing them, but a lot of times they're pushed to the side. And so, we've had some friends and family through the years that when the kids were younger, especially Toby had a hospital stay, they would send gifts to all of my kids. And that it was huge because it recognizes that Toby's not the only one. It's asking about how the other kids are doing and not just the child with disabilities or special needs. I and again, it's having your community around you. I know that I could not have raised my children. I have two adult kids, and they often talk about the empathy and the compassion that they have for others, and I can see it in just their lives, how it's playing out now. My oldest son has helped with kids with disabilities in the home church that he serves in with college, and that's beautiful. But I know that they wouldn't have that if it wouldn't been for family being around, helping them not miss their activities and just in those kind of things. I think, and then that's hard. That's a struggle, and you can't always do that. But to the best of my ability, we've tried to allow them to have separate identities away from just being Toby's brother or sister.
But I think you also have to acknowledge that they grieve too. They
Yes.
grieve differently than a parent would, but there's grief for them as well. And I think
Yeah,
you have to honor that space, recognize it, and give them an opportunity to voice that.
definitely. Yeah, we have a lot of conversations about that now. I think as a parent, like you said, being willing to take that feedback and realize they're not criticizing you, they just want to talk, and being on the receiving end of that with kindness is so good.
So, Carrie, if a listener is resonating with our conversation today and maybe they don't remember anything else from this conversation, what hope-filled perspective do you want to leave them with?
Jesus wants to be present with you in your pain, not to push him away, try to handle things on your own, be in control, but that he wants to be present with you in your pain. And he knows. He knows what it feels like to suffer and to just all the things that he experienced as a human here on earth. And just that his comfort is just incredible. And so is his peace. And he will be with us through this.
Carrie, if we've got listeners who are special needs parents, or maybe they've got friends or family who are, and they want to know how to navigate this in a healthier way, where can they find your book?
So, our book, The Other Side of Special, is on Amazon and Baker Books and most online retailers.
Thank you for coming on the program and sharing out of your own pain, out of your own experience and wisdom to encourage our listeners. I think this is going to be a valuable episode, not just for other special needs parents, but for those of us who love special needs parents. So I appreciate you doing that for us.
Thank you for having me.
Friends, I hope that there was something in today's episode that encouraged you, whether you're a special needs parent or grandparent or aunt and uncle or friend, or even if you're not. I hope it gave you a greater appreciation of how we can walk alongside those who are. And if you are not a special needs parent, but you know someone who is, it's a long journey. It's tiring. There is that caregiver fatigue. So, would you consider sharing this episode with them to give them biblically based, hope filled perspective so that they can walk this walk, knowing that Jesus loves them and he's present with them in their pain? Friends, I just want you to know that whatever you're going through, whether you're a special needs parent or you're walking some other kind of trial, Jesus, just like Carrie said, wants to be with you in your pain. And it's okay to pour out your feelings to him in lament. He gives us the gift of lament,
Mm.
but it also opens up the opportunity to trust him more. Friends, I'm grateful that you joined us for this episode, and I look forward to bringing you another biblically based hope filled perspective next week. Until then, it's my prayer for you that you have a hope filled week.